I was washing dishes when the phone rang that first time. It was a small thing, really. The kind of ordinary moment you've lived 1,000 times and never remembered once. The kitchen window was open and the late afternoon light came in low and soft, making the dust motes glow. The radio was on low, some old Motown song humming in the background, and I was standing at the sink, hands in warm, soapy water. The smell of lemon detergent mixed with the faint scent of the lavender candle I'd forgotten to blow out in the dining room. The phone sat on the little table by the wall next to the old recipe box and the chipped blue sugar bowl. My landline. Most people my age still keep one just in case, though I suppose nobody really knows what case we're waiting for anymore. Emergencies, I say if anyone asks. Although I've lived most of my life without a true emergency ever finding me through that cord. It rang once, twice. I wiped my hands on the dish towel and walked over. I glanced at the caller ID, unknown number. That wasn't unusual. I get plenty of spam calls, insurance offers, scams, charities that don't really sound like charities. Sometimes I let it go to the answering machine. That day, for no reason I can explain, I picked it up. "Hello," I said. There was a crackle, a breath, that soft, hollow sound of a line connecting over some distance you can't see. Then a woman's voice said very clearly, "Annie." My heart stuttered hard against my ribs. Nobody calls me Annie anymore. Not my children, not my grandchildren, not the few friends I still see. To them, I'm Anne or Grandma or Mrs. Clark at the pharmacy. Annie belonged to another time, childhood mostly, and then young adulthood when my mother would still call up the stairs, "Annie, you'll be late for work if you don't move yourself." The voice on the phone had the same pitch, the same little rasp on the N, the same warmth under the word that made it sound less like a name and more like an embrace. For a moment I couldn't speak. I just stood there with the receiver pressed to my ear, my free hand gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. "Hello," the voice said again, a little more urgent. "Annie, are you there?" I swallowed. Mom." Silence, then a soft, relieved sigh that sounded like it traveled across years more than wires. "Oh, sweetheart," she murmured, "there you are." I must have stopped breathing because the room tilted slightly. I heard the radio still playing in the kitchen, the clink of dishes settling in the drying rack, the distant sound of a car passing outside. Everything as it should be, except for the impossible thing happening against my ear. "My God," I whispered, you're dead." "I know," she said, very calm, "but I wanted to hear your voice." Before I could say anything else, before I could ask the 100 questions that exploded in my chest, the line went dead. That harsh, empty beeping filled my ear. I pulled the phone away and stared at it. Just a gray plastic handset, slightly yellowed with age, a coiled cord twisting from the base to my hand, the little red light on the answering machine blinking steadily as if nothing at all had happened. I stood there for a long time, listening to my own breathing and the fatting notes of the song on the radio. My mother had died 25 years earlier. I was 47 then, I'm 72 now. I held her hand in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and stale flowers while the machines ticked and hummed. I watched her chest rise and fall, slower and slower until it didn't anymore. I signed papers. I chose an urn. I spoke at her memorial and my voice shook only once. I know she died, I was there. And yet 5 minutes earlier she'd called my kitchen. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. What could I say? My dead mother just rang me up for a chat, doesn't exactly land as casual conversation over coffee. Instead, I finished the dishes with trembling hands. I wiped the counters. I turned off the radio. I checked the doors twice before going to bed as if a phone call might somehow unlatch them. That night I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old house creak around me. I told myself it must have been a mistake, a trick of the mind, maybe a telemarketer who happened to have a similar voice. Maybe I'd misheard the name. Maybe I was starting to lose it, the way my friend Marilyn had last year when she began seeing her late husband in the grocery store aisles. But I could still hear it, clear as if it had just been spoken. "Oh, sweetheart, there you are." It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, My mother always packed more meaning into a sentence than what the dictionary allowed. That same mixture of relief and faint scolding she used when I came home late as a teenager. You can't fake that, not to someone who's spent a lifetime listening. The next morning, I made tea and sat at the small table by the kitchen window. The backyard looked exactly as it always did in early spring, grass patchy and damp, the old lilac bush just starting to bud, the bird feeder swinging slowly in the mild wind. Across the fence, my neighbor's dog barked at a squirrel. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and tried to think like a sensible woman. Maybe I dreamed it, maybe I'd fallen asleep for a second at the sink and the call had only happened in my head. I've had dreams like that before, so vivid I wake up sure I've lived them. Except the phone log showed an incoming call at 4:12 p.m. Unknown number, 2 minutes 36 seconds. 2 minutes and 36 seconds of what? My tea went cold while I stared at that little digital readout. To understand why that call shook me so badly, you'd need to understand something about my mother and me. Her name was Margaret, though everyone called her Maggie. She was not a gentlewoman exactly, but she was steady. You could lean on her and people did. Family, neighbors, women from church. She had that no-nonsense kindness older women sometimes carried, the kind that keeps a whole street stitched together. She smelled of ponds, cold cream, and ivory soap, and always the faintest trace of cigarette smoke she insisted she'd given up years ago. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning houses, cooking meals, folding laundry. When I was a girl, I thought she was the strongest person in the world. We were close and we were not. That's how mothers and daughters often are. She raised me alone after my father left when I was 6. She worked 2 jobs and went without new shoes for 3 winters so I could have braces. But she also had a hardness in her, a kind of quiet disappointment that seemed aimed at the world but sometimes landed on me. "Don't be foolish," she'd say when I cried over some schoolyard heartbreak. "Life is hard enough without you making it harder in your own head." Love from her came in the form of hot meals, ironed shirts, and a roof that never leaked. Feelings were something you dealt with in the privacy of your own room. When she was diagnosed with breast cancer at 67, she took the news like a woman being told her train would be delayed. "Well," she said to the doctor, smoothing her skirt, "what can we do about it?" She fought because she always fought. Surgeries, chemo, radiation. She lost her hair, lost weight, lost the ability to climb the stairs without stopping halfway to catch her breath. But she never lost that stubborn set to her jaw. What she did lose toward the end was patience, with the illness, with her own body, with me hovering around her like an anxious shadow. We had our worst argument 3 days before she died. I had tried to convince her to move into hospice where they could manage her pain better. She refused. "I'm not leaving my house to die," she snapped, eyes blazing from the pillows. "They can carry me out in a box when it's time, not before." I'd been exhausted, 2 kids at home, a husband working extra hours, nights spent sleeping in a chair by her bed. Something in me snapped right back. "You're not the only one in this," I said. "We're trying to help you, you're making everything harder." Her face closed off in that way I knew too well. "Then don't," she said quietly, "don't help if it's such a burden." "That's not what I meant." "I think it is." She turned her face to the wall. "You should go." I left, angry and guilty. I told myself I'd come back the next morning and apologize. When I did, she was unconscious. By the time the doctor called me back to the hospital, it was to say, "You should come say goodbye." So you see, there were things between us that never got said, apologies that never found their way to air. I have lived 25 years with that half-finished conversation lodged in my chest like a small, permanent stone. Maybe that's why when the unknown number rang again 2 days later, I didn't let it go to the machine. It was evening this time. I just finished eating baked chicken, roasted potatoes, peas. The news was still murmuring on the television in the living room. I was rinsing my plate when the phone rang. Unknown number, the screen said again. I wiped my hands slowly, my heart climbing into my throat. I picked up. Hello. Static, then faintly. Annie. I sank into the nearest chair. Mom, I whispered. The static cleared, her voice came through more clearly this time. You sound older, she said with a little laugh. Like me, isn't that something? I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling the rapid thud of my heartbeat. You're supposed to be dead, I said. I was there, I watched you. The word stuck. I know, she said calmly. I remember that. You wore that green blouse I always liked, the one with the little buttons. I hadn't thought about that blouse in years, dark green with tiny white buttons shaped like flowers. She'd given it to me for my birthday. I'd worn it to the hospital because I thought it made me look more put together than I felt. How do you? I started. She sighed softly. Time doesn't move the same way for me, sweetheart. I don't know all the hows, I just know that sometimes I can reach out just a little. I closed my eyes. The kitchen smelled of dish soap and the faint onion from dinner. A draft slipped under the back door and brushed the ankles of my slippers. What do you want? I asked more sharply than I meant to. She didn't seem offended. I wanted to see how you are, she said. You were always too busy to talk back then. Guilt flushed hot through me, old familiar guilt. I wasn't too busy, I said. I was scared. I didn't know how to do any of it. I had the kids and Mark working late and you were so stubborn, you wouldn't let me in. Maybe, she conceded, maybe I was, doesn't matter now. It matters to me, I said. She was quiet for a moment. I know, she said softly, that's why I'm calling. The line crackled again, her voice sounded farther away for a second, then closer. Do you remember, she asked suddenly, when you broke the blue vase in the living room? I blinked. I was 10, I'd been dancing to some song on the radio with my eyes closed, spinning and spinning until my elbow hit the small table. The vase, tall, sky blue, her favorite, had tipped and shattered on the floor. I'd frozen, then started crying before she even came into the room. She stood there in the doorway, taking in the scene. I'd expected yelling. Instead, she'd walked over, knelt down, and hugged me. It's just a thing, she'd said. It's not you. I'd forgotten that moment. I remember, I said. Why are you bringing that up? Because that's what this is, she said. All this time in your head, all this guilt, it's just a broken thing, it's not you. Tears slipped down my cheeks before I realized I was crying. I should have stayed that night, I choked. I shouldn't have gone home angry. Yes, you should have, she said matter-of-factly. You had 2 little ones waiting on you, you were tired. I wasn't very kind that night, was I? My voice dropped to a whisper. You told me to go, I said. I know, her voice softened. I was afraid. When I'm afraid, I get mean. It's not something I'm proud of. I thought I'd have more time to fix it. The grief in her voice sounded as real as my own. You don't get to carry all of that, she continued. I threw you out so I didn't have to see that look on your face, the one you have when you're trying not to cry. She paused. I'm sorry, Annie. For a moment, I couldn't speak. 25 years of weight pressed against my sternum, all the swallowed apologies and unsaid words. They shifted just a little. How are you doing this? I whispered. Is this real? Am I losing my mind? She laughed softly. Maybe both, maybe neither. Does it matter? It matters to me, I said. I don't know what to believe. Believe that I'm sorry, she said. Start there. The line crackled again, louder this time. It sounded like wind rushing over the mouthpiece. Mom, I said, panicked. Don't hang up, I have questions. You always do, she said, amused. Listen, I don't have long. There's something I need to tell you, something I never did. My hand tightened around the receiver. What? I asked. She took a breath that sounded like she was still attached to lungs somewhere. Go to the attic, she said. The far corner under the old Christmas boxes, there's a shoebox with blue flowers on it. You need to open it. I frowned. What? Why? But there was only static. Mom. No answer. Mom. The line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time after that, my own voice still echoing in my ears. Nothing in the house moved except for the slow turning of the ceiling fan in the next room. If this was a hallucination, it was a remarkably specific one. The attic. I didn't like the attic. It was a cramped, itchy space that smelled of dust and insulation. Mark used to go up when we were younger, digging through boxes, laughing at old relics. After he died 6 years ago, I avoided it as much as I could. I knew what was up there: Christmas decorations, boxes of the kids' school papers, old clothes in vacuum bags, forgotten junk I couldn't quite bring myself to throw away. And apparently a shoebox with blue flowers. I found myself climbing the pull-down ladder 10 minutes later, a flashlight in one hand, my heart beating too fast. The attic greeted me with its usual stale breath. The wooden boards creaked under my slippers. The single small window at the far end let in a slice of gray evening light, illuminating floating specks of dust. I moved aside the plastic tubs marked Christmas lights and ornaments fragile. Behind them, shoved deep into the corner, was a smaller cardboard box I couldn't immediately see. I had to get down on my knees, the boards biting into my skin through my pants. My fingers brushed something smooth. I pulled it out. A shoebox, faded white cardboard with blue flowers printed along the sides. The lid was secured with a brittle rubber band turned almost brown with age. For a moment I just knelt there holding it. It felt strangely heavy, as if it contained something more than paper and old air. I carried it downstairs and set it on the kitchen table. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, indifferent. I slipped off the rubber band, lifted the lid. Inside were letters, dozens of them folded and stacked neatly, their edges yellowed. A few photographs curled with time, and on top a small envelope with my name written on it in my mother's careful, looping handwriting. Annie. My throat tightened. I unfolded the flap with shaking fingers and slid out a single sheet of lined paper. The date at the top made my heart clench. March 7th, the year she died, 2 weeks before the diagnosis. Annie, if you are reading this, then something has happened to me and I haven't had the courage or the chance to tell you this face to face. Knowing you, you are angry with me already, so this will either make that better or worse. I hope for the first, but I understand the second. There is something you don't know about your father. I gripped the table edge with my free hand. Your father did leave when you were 6, I'm afraid that part is true, but he left because I told him to. I can imagine your face right now, so I will explain. When I met your father, I was not the person I pretended to be. I had already lived one life by then. I had already had another baby. I stopped reading for a second, my pulse roaring in my ears. Another baby. His name was Michael. I was 19, young, stupid, and very much in love with a man who ran the other way as soon as I told him I was pregnant. My parents were furious. They sent me to live with an aunt in another town until the disgrace passed. I had the baby in a charity hospital and was made to sign papers I barely read. They told me it was for the best, that he'd go to a family who could give him everything I couldn't. I never saw him again. I stared at the words. The letters swam for a second before my eyes. My mother had never told me any of this, not even hinted at it. In all the hours we'd spent in that house together, folding laundry, peeling potatoes, watching television, she had never once said the name Michael in my presence. By the time I met your father, I had learned to keep that part of myself locked away. He knew, of course. I told him one night when we were sitting by the river, I thought he might walk away too. He didn't. He said we'd make a new life, and we did for a time. But ghosts have a way of crowding a house, even if they never touch the floor. When you were 3, I started dreaming about Michael a lot. I'd see him in every boy on the street. Your father did his best, but I became difficult, clingy, then distant, afraid of losing you the way I'd lost him. I smothered you and then pushed you away when I caught myself doing it, not my finest years. Then one day when you were 6, I got a letter. The paper trembled in my hands. It was from the agency that had placed him. He was looking for me, for us. he wanted contact, he wanted to know if he had siblings, what kind of people we were, he wanted to know why. I panicked. I couldn't bear the thought of you finding out when you were so young. I thought it would ruin you, make you feel second best or not enough. I thought your father would be angry that this past I had brought into our marriage was now knocking at the door. So I hid the letter, I pretended I never saw it. Your father found it in the drawer 2 weeks later. We had the worst fight of our marriage. He wanted to answer. He said no one deserved to be left in the dark like that, especially a child, even a grown one. I told him he didn't understand that I was protecting you, that this was my shame to manage. In the end, I gave him an ultimatum. If he contacted Michael, I would take you and leave. If he kept quiet, we'd move on. He left instead. I closed my eyes, pressing the heel of my hand against my forehead. My father's leaving had been, in my mind, the great wound of my childhood. I had spent years wondering what was so wrong with us that he could walk away. I had blamed him silently, fiercely. And now, in my kitchen 25 years after my mother's death, I was reading that it was her, not him, who had drawn that line in the sand. I force myself to keep reading. I don't write this to excuse myself. There is no excuse. I was a coward. I was also a young mother who had already been forced to give up one child and was terrified of losing another. Both things can be true. I kept the letters that came after, even though I never answered them. They are in this box with some old photographs I managed to find of him when he was small. I followed his life from afar when I could. Every now and then I would see a face in a crowd and think I'd found him, but of course I hadn't. By the time I gathered the courage to write back, too much time had passed. I didn't know where he was anymore. I didn't know who he had become. I didn't know how to step into his life in any way that wouldn't hurt him more. So I did nothing, again. You have every right to hate me for this. You have every right to feel betrayed or confused or indifferent. I won't be there to argue my side of things. Maybe that's for the best. I always was too good at defending myself. But I want you to know 3 things. 1, your father didn't leave because he didn't love you. He left because he couldn't live with the lie I asked him to keep. 2, you were never, not for a single moment, second best. You were the center of my life in a way I don't have words for. All my foolishness and fear came from that love, twisted as it was. 3, if you ever decide to look for Michael, I won't be here to stop you. I hope you won't wait as long as I did to do the right thing for someone. I am sorry, Annie, for all of it, for the things I did and the things I didn't. I know I wasn't always the mother you needed. I hope I was enough of the mother you deserved. Love. Mom. My vision blurred, the edges of the paper trembled as I held it. The kitchen clock ticked on. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed. A dog barked twice, then quieted. In front of me lay a shoebox full of letters I had never known existed, written by a man I had never met, a brother somewhere out there who had once gone looking for us. For her. The room felt suddenly too small, too full of air. I couldn't quite breathe. The phone called, the box, the letter. If this was all some elaborate invention of my own mind, it had gone to great lengths to hurt me with details. And yet, under the hurt, something else stirred, a rearranging of old hurts and old loyalties. My mother, who I'd always seen as the one left behind, had been the one holding the door shut. My father, the villain of my childhood stories, had tried to do the right thing and been pushed out for it. And somewhere, a man named Michael had grown up without answers. I sat there for a long time, the letter spread out in front of me, the shoebox lids and corners casting small, sharp shadows on the table. My mother had called me from wherever she was, and instead of heavenly reassurance or haunting, she'd given me homework. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that name. Michael. It felt foreign and familiar all at once. The idea of a brother was strange to me. I'd grown up an only child in practice, even if I was not one in truth. I'd sometimes wished for a sibling when I was younger, but as I got older, I made peace with the family I had, the mother who worked herself to the bone, the absent father who lived in my mind more than anywhere else. Now, at 72, the possibility of having family I had never known existed felt both hopeful and cruel. Was he still alive? Did he hate us? Did he even remember trying to find her? Did he know he had a sister who had spent her entire life not knowing his name? I made myself a cup of tea in the middle of the night and sat at the kitchen table in my robe, the letter beside me, the rest of the shoebox unopened. The house creaked in the settling way old houses do. A fridge fan whirred and clicked off. I thought of my mother, 19 and pregnant, shipped off to an aunt's, signing papers under fluorescent hospital lights, handing over a baby and being told it was for the best, coming back home with empty arms and telling herself she'd move forward. I thought of her at 30 with a 3-year-old me and a husband who wanted to open the door to the past. I could see her fear, feel it like a knot in my own stomach. Behind all her anger there had always been fear of poverty, of shame, of loss. She had not been honest, she had not been brave. But she had also been human. I don't know how long I sat there. Eventually the sky outside the kitchen window began to turn that thin, pale blue that comes before sunrise. The birds started up one by one. At around 6 the phone rang. The sound made me jump. The mug rattled in its saucer. I stared at the caller ID. Unknown number. My fingers felt numb as I picked up. "Hello, Annie," she said, and something in my chest unclenched at the sound of her voice. "You knew I'd look," I said. "You knew I'd find it." "Of course you would," she said. "You've never been able to leave a box unopened in your life." I let out a breath that was almost a laugh. Tears prickled at my eyes. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "When you were alive, why keep it all in a box in the attic?" She was quiet for a moment. "I tried," she said finally, "twice. You had the kids running around your legs and I opened my mouth to say it and all I could see was your face when you'd realize I'd lied to you your whole life, so I shut it again." I thought of all the times I'd sat in that very kitchen, annoyed by her silence on smaller things. How, even as adults, we fall into old patterns with our parents, them controlling the narrative, us pushing against it. "I don't know what to do with this," I admitted. "I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know right now," she said. "Feelings aren't a test you pass or fail, they're just whether they change." I snorted softly. That's awfully philosophical for someone who used to tell me to stop crying and wash my face. "I've had time to think," she said, lightness in her voice. Then more seriously, "I'm not asking you to forgive me, I only wanted you to have the choice I took away from both of you." "The choice to find him?" I asked. "Yes." I stared at the shoebox on the table. "Do you know where he is?" I asked. "Now, I mean." Her answer came slowly. "I know he made a good life," she said. "Married, children, he was lost." There was relief in her tone. "Beyond that, it's not mine to say." "So this is on me." It came out more tired than resentful. "It's your life," she said gently. "It always has been, I just kept acting like it was mine." Silence hummed between us. "What if he doesn't want to hear from us?" I said quietly. "What if I'm just ripping open an old wound?" She sighed, and I could picture her sitting at the worn kitchen table of my childhood, cigarette in hand, thinking. "I can't answer that for you," she said. "I thought staying silent would protect him. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was right. What I know is that not knowing is its own kind of wound. You've lived with it about your father. Do you want to give him the same?" I looked at the letter again, at the lines about my father leaving not because of me, but because of her ultimatum. "I spent my whole life thinking he walked out on us," I said, "that he didn't love us enough to stay." "He loved you," she said. "He was a good man. I was not a good woman, not then." "You did what you thought was right," I said automatically. It was an old reflex defending her. "No," she said firmly. "I did what I thought would keep me from feeling my own shame. That's different." We were both quiet for a moment. Finally, I said, if I look for him and he hates me, I won't have you to blame it on. Her laugh was small and sad. I've taken enough blame in my life, she said. You can keep giving it to me if it helps, I can take it, but this is about you now. The line crackled like distant thunder. Mom, I said quickly, don't go yet, there's so much I want to ask. That's how it always is, she said. With everyone, we always have one more question, one more thing. Were you afraid? I asked suddenly, at the end. There was a pause. Yes, she said quietly, very, not of dying, of leaving you, of leaving so much undone, of you thinking I didn't love you enough to fight harder. I clasped the receiver tighter. I never thought that, I said. I was angry, but not about that. I know, she said. I see that now. I see a lot now I was too stubborn to see before. Her voice was fatting, like someone walking down a long hallway. Mom, I said, panic rising, are you coming back? Will you call again? Maybe, she said, if I can, if you need it. She hesitated. But Annie. Yes. You don't need a ghost to tell you what to do. You never did. Then the line went dead. I didn't move for a long time. The house around me was the same as it had been yesterday. The same ceramic rooster cookie jar, the same magnets on the fridge, the same smudge on the wall where my grandson had once crashed a toy truck. The world outside continued as if nothing had shifted. The trash truck roared down the street at 7 sharp, the neighbor's dog let out its usual morning racket, the mail slot clanged at 10. And yet, something in the center of my life had tilted. For 25 years, my story had been simple. My father left, my mother did her best, we were poor but proud. It was a neat narrative. I had arranged my memories around it like furniture in a room. Now someone had pulled up the floorboards and shown me the foundation underneath. It wasn't neat, it wasn't clean, it was human and messy and full of fear. The question that remained sat in front of me in the form of that shoebox. What was I going to do about Michael? I waited 3 days before opening the rest. Not because I was afraid of the contents, though I was, but because life still moves even when you've spoken to the dead. The laundry needs doing, the bills need paying, the body demands its routine. I went to my doctor's appointment. I picked up my cholesterol medication. I smiled at the cashier who asked politely, "And how are you today, Mrs. Clark?" and answered, "Oh, I'm fine, dear," because what else does one say? But every night when the house was quiet, I'd find myself standing in the kitchen doorway, looking at the shoebox on the table like it was a living thing. On the third night after dinner, I poured myself a small glass of red wine, something I rarely do alone, but it felt like the right kind of company for what I was about to do. I sat down, took a deep breath, and began. The letters were from him, from Michael. The earliest was dated the year I turned 6. The handwriting was neat, deliberate, like someone trying very hard to be taken seriously. Dear Mrs. O'Connell, I hope this letter reaches you. My name is Michael. I was told you are my birth mother. I would like to know if that is true. I don't want anything from you. I just want to know who you are. They weren't dramatic letters. There were no accusations, no theatrical pleas, just a steady, patient reaching out. He wrote once a year, sometimes twice, for almost a decade. He told her small things about his life, where he went to school, that he liked science and hated math, that he'd joined the soccer team, that his adoptive parents were kind people who baked him a cake every birthday. He seemed determined to reassure her that he was okay, as if he sensed she might be afraid of hearing otherwise. In one, he mentioned a scar on his knee from falling off his bike at 10. In another, he talked about the ocean, which he'd seen for the first time at 19, standing on a pier with a girl he loved but wasn't sure loved him back. He asked gently every time for a reply. Even no, he wrote once, would be better than silence. My mother's silence sat heavy between each envelope. The last letter was more tentative. Dear Margaret, I don't know if you've read any of these. Maybe you moved. Maybe the agency gave me the wrong address. Maybe you're afraid to answer. I don't want to make your life harder. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay, that I'm not angry, that I've had a good life. I'm getting married this year. Her name is Laura. I don't know why I want you to know that, but I do. If you ever decide you want to meet me, this is our number. If not, I hope you have peace. Thank you for giving me life, even if you couldn't keep me in it. Sincerely, Michael. There was a phone number at the bottom, an area code I recognized as one state over. I traced it with my finger, the ink slightly smudged with time. I could feel her in these pages too, even though she hadn't written a word. Her fear, her shame, her love, all pressed into the folds by omission. Behind the letters were photographs. A baby with a tuft of dark hair and a slightly furrowed brow, a boy at 12 grinning at the camera with a missing front tooth, a young man in a graduation cap, eyes bright and wary. He didn't look like me, not exactly. Different nose, different jaw, but there was something in the eyes, a certain way they crinkled when he smiled. Something that said family. By the time I reached the bottom of the box, my wine sat untouched. My heart felt sore, as if I'd been clenching it in a fist for hours. I picked up the last letter again, reading the number. Then, without fully deciding, I stood up, walked to the counter, and picked up the phone. My hand hovered over the keypad. I imagined an old man answering, or a middle-aged one like my son. I imagined him saying, "Hello," in a voice that might sound strange and familiar all at once. What would I say? "Hi, you don't know me, but we share a mother who kept us both in the dark." "Hello, I'm the sister your entire life has been missing. Do you remember writing letters to a woman who never wrote back?" I put the phone back down. Not tonight. I turned on the television and let some loud, brainless show fill the room, drowning out the echoes of my mother's imaginary voice saying, "You never needed a ghost to tell you what to do." The calls stopped for a while. A week passed then too. I began to worry less about whether they had been real and more about whether they would return. I found myself listening for the phone in a way I hadn't in years. Whenever it rang, my stomach flipped. Half the time it was a telemarketer. Once it was my daughter checking in from 3 states away. Once it was the pharmacy with a reminder about my prescription. Unknown number appeared 3 times. Twice I snatched it up to find silence and a hang-up. Once it was a robocall about extended car warranties, and I almost laughed with relief. Life went on. I went to my knitting circle where the other women gossiped about neighbors and grandchildren and hip replacements. I nodded and smiled and did my best not to let my attention drift too visibly. I started taking walks again the way I used to with Mark. Around the block, past the same houses I'd seen for 30 years. The world looked the same, but I felt different, like someone walking under a sky she'd just discovered had a crack in it. Sometimes I'd find my mind drifting to my father. For years, I'd told anyone who asked that we weren't close. It was easier than explaining the jagged edges of half-remembered visits and broken promises. Now I wondered what story he'd been telling himself all this time. Had he tried to find me? Had he decided I'd chosen her over him? Was he even still alive? I could look. There were ways now, websites, records, people whose entire business was finding other people. But I was tired, old bones, old heart. One ghost's homework felt like enough. 3 weeks after the last call, on an ordinary Wednesday morning, the phone rang again. I was in the garden this time, nailing in the dirt, thinning the carrots. The sun was warm on my shoulders. The smell of earth and tomato leaves filled the air. My knees ached pleasantly. For a moment I considered letting it go. Then I heard it, the particular ring of the landline, slightly different from my cell phone's cheerful buzz. I wiped my hands on my trousers and hurried inside, leaving the trowel stuck in the soil. The phone rang again, shriller now. Unknown number. I picked up on the 4th ring. "Hello." For a moment there was nothing but the sound of static, then I heard breathing. "Annie," her voice came thin but clear. Relief washed through me so hard I had to sit down. "You took your time," I said, trying for lightness and barely finding it. "I always did," she said. You used to complain that I'd be late to my own funeral. Turns out you weren't, I said. You were very punctual for that. She laughed, and the sound was such a perfect echo of the one in my memory that my eyes filled with tears. I wasn't sure you'd call again, I admitted. I wasn't sure I'd be able to, she said. It's difficult, like shouting through water. I rubbed at my temples. I opened the box, I said. I read the letters. I know, she said. I felt you. I blinked. What does that mean? She hesitated. Your life, it glows, she said. From here, not with light, with weight, every choice, every hurt, every joy, I can feel where things are heavy. The box was very heavy. I let that image sit for a moment. I almost called him, I said. I know, she repeated. Your hand hovered over the buttons. I swallowed. Why didn't you? Because I was afraid, I said honestly. Afraid of hurting him, afraid of hearing anger, afraid of hearing nothing at all, afraid of changing the story he's told himself for all these years. He's had to live with silence, she said softly. That's the story you shared, you and he, each in your own way. I don't know if I can fix that now, I said, so late. Maybe you can't fix it, she said. Maybe that's not the goal. Maybe the goal is just to tell the truth for once while someone is still around to hear it. We sat with that. I could hear something in the background of the line now, a faint, distant humming, not like machines, more like wind through trees if I had to name it. Will you be angry with me if I do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded. I've been angry with myself enough for 2 lifetimes, she said dryly. I don't have much left for you. You get to choose. That's what being alive is, choosing over and over until you can't. Did you ever meet him? I asked suddenly, even once. No, she said, and the regret in that single syllable was a deep well. I saw him once from across a street. He didn't know I did. That was enough to break me for years. I pictured her, younger than I am now, standing on a sidewalk watching a stranger walk by. I'm so tired of being afraid, I said. She made a small noise. Fear has been the third person at our table for a long time, she said. Maybe it's time to ask it to leave. I exhaled slowly. What about you? I asked. Are you at peace? It felt like a childish question, but it was the one that had sat at the back of my mind since that first impossible call. Sometimes, she said after a while, peace isn't a place, it's moments, like it was there for you. What do you mean? I asked. When you sit in the garden and feel the sun on your face, she said. When your grandson laughed so hard milk came out of his nose at Christmas, when you forgave Mark for dying before you were ready to be alone. Those were peace. I blinked away tears. You see all that? I feel it, she answered, enough to know you've had pieces of happiness even when you think you haven't. The humming on the line grew louder, her voice wavered. Mom, I said, fear prickling anew, is this the last time? I don't know, she said, time is slippery here. She paused. Why do you still have a long list of complaints? Despite everything, I smiled. Of course, I said, who else will I nag if not you? Find someone else, she said, nag that brother of yours. My chest squeezed. Do you want me to tell him about you? I asked. If I find him, do you want me to say you're sorry that you watched from a distance? There was a long pause. Yes, she said finally, if he wants to hear it, if he doesn't keep it, it's yours now. Guilt, love, regret, all passed down like old china. I'm scared, I said again quietly. Of course you are, she said. Do it anyway or don't, but don't let fear be the only voice making the choice. The humming became a rushing, like static and wind and distance all braided together. Mom, I have to go, she said. Annie. Yes. You were enough, she said, even when I was not. My throat closed. You were my mother, I whispered, even when you weren't perfect. None of us are, she said. Be kinder to yourself than I was to me. And then she was gone. This time I knew she wouldn't be back. I stared at the phone in my hand, listening to the empty tone. Then I hung up. The house felt very still. Outside, the trowel stood in the dirt where I'd left it, catching the light. A small bird hopped along the fence, pecking at something I couldn't see. My mother was dead, had been for 25 years. She had also just told me as clearly as if she were sitting across from me to stop letting fear run my life. I walked back to the table, picked up the last letter, the one with the number, and dialed. My fingers shook, but they pressed each button all the same. 1 ring. 2. 3. A click, the faint sound of someone breathing into the receiver. Hello, a man's voice, deeper than I expected, older, of course. Time hadn't stood still for him either. Hello, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Is this Michael? A pause. Who's calling? He asked, cautious but not rude. My name is Anne, I said. I think we're related. Silence stretched. I could hear a television in the background, turned low, a door closing somewhere on his end, the muffled echo of another voice calling something I couldn't make out. I'm sorry, he said slowly. What did you say your name was? Anne, I repeated. My mother was Margaret O'Connell. She placed a son for adoption when she was 19. Your letters came to our house. She kept them. I only just found them. Another pause, a softer intake of breath. I wrote those letters 40 years ago, he said, voice unsteady. She never answered. I know, I said. She wanted to, I think, but she didn't. She died 25 years ago. There it was, the truth laid out like dishes on a table. He exhaled long and slow. I figured she was gone, he said. I stopped trying, it hurt too much. I'm sorry, I said. I'm so sorry. There was a small, brittle laugh on the other end. People keep apologizing to me for that, he said, like they were there, like they could have dragged her to the mailbox. I'm not apologizing for her, I said quietly. I'm apologizing for me, for not knowing, for living a whole life without asking the questions that might have led me to you sooner. I could hear him breathing, could almost hear the whirl of thoughts on his end. How did you find my number? He asked. Those letters, that address isn't even mine anymore. She kept the last one, I said. With a number, I didn't know if it would still be you, I just dialed. He made a sound, a cross between a sigh and a laugh. I've had this number for 30 years, he said. Habit, I guess. My kids tell me to switch carriers, but I never bothered. Kids, my mind snagged on the word, but I didn't reach for it yet. What do you want from me? He asked, not unkindly, after all this time. The question my mother had always been afraid of. Nothing, I said. Something I don't know. Honesty felt like the only possible currency. I wanted you to know she read your letters, I said, that you weren't shouting into a void, that you mattered to her, even if you never got proof of it. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly. She kept them, he asked. All of them, I said, in a box in the attic. Another silence, filled with more than words could have carried. I used to picture her throwing them away unopened, he said, or the agency giving me the wrong address on purpose. I thought maybe she'd moved and never told them. I built so many stories in my head to explain it. I did too, I admitted, different stories about different things. He cleared his throat. So you're my sister, he said. The word sounded strange on his tongue. Yes, I said, half-sister I suppose if we're being technical, but yes, I think so. He let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. This is insane, he said. I'm 65 years old. I thought this kind of thing only happened in those emotional reunion shows my wife watches. Mine too, I said, and we both laughed at that, a small shared absurdity. We talked. Not about everything, not yet, but about enough. About where we lived, what we did or used to do before retirement, the shape of our families. He told me about his adoptive parents, both gone now. I told him about my mother as I knew her, the closed-off kindness, the hard work, the cigarettes she pretended not to smoke. He was quiet for a long time after I described her. That sounds like the woman I pictured, he said finally, stubborn. You have no idea, I said, and we both smiled into the phone. At one point he asked, do you hate her? The question hung heavy between us. I don't know, I said honestly. I thought I didn't for a long time, then I did. Now I think I just see her as a flawed person who made a lot of decisions out of fear. I loved her, I still do, and I'm angry. Both are true. He exhaled shakily. That's more generous than I've managed most of my life, he said. Well, I said, you had more reason to be angry. We were quiet again. Do you want to meet? He asked suddenly. We don't have to. I don't want to blow up your life. Mine's full too, but I'd like to see your face just once. The thought scared me, two old strangers sitting across from each other trying to find family in the lines of each other's cheeks. It also warmed something deep in my chest. Yes, I said, I'd like that. We made a plan as calmly as if we were arranging lunch with a distant cousin instead of stepping into entirely new shapes of ourselves. A coffee shop halfway between our towns, next Saturday. After we hung up, I sat at the table, the phone in my lap, my hands numb. I half expected it to ring again, my mother's voice scolding, couldn't you have waited a week? I only just told you about him. But the house was silent. Outside, the light had shifted. Shadows lengthened across the lawn, my abandoned trowel glinted where I'd left it. I went back out to the garden and finished thinning the carrots. The earth felt cool and solid under my fingers. He looked nothing like the boy in the photographs. Of course he didn't. That boy had been frozen in someone else's wallet for decades. The man walking into the coffee shop had gray at his temples, lines around his mouth, and a cautious way of holding himself like he was ready to bolt if this turned out to be a cruel joke. But when he saw me sitting at the corner table, hands wrapped around a mug I hadn't touched, a flicker went across his face. Recognition of something that wasn't a memory exactly, but not nothing. "And?" he asked. I stood up. "Michael." We regarded each other for a second, two strangers who shared cheekbones. "You're taller than I pictured," I said. It was a useless thing to say, but it made him laugh. "You sound like my wife," he said. "She says that whenever she meets anyone who isn't on a screen." We hugged awkwardly. His shoulder smelled faintly of laundry detergent and coffee. We talked. We talked for 3 hours, about our mother mostly and the strange way she had now intersected our lives again. I didn't tell him about the phone calls, some things you keep in the soft, private part of your heart, but I told him about the letter, about the box, about her fear. He listened, fingers tapping lightly on his cup. "I hated her for a long time," he said quietly, "for not answering. I imagined all kinds of things about why. I made her the villain in my story because it was the only story that made sense. Hearing that she kept the letters, I don't know what to do with that. I've been rearranging villains in my story too," I said. "It's exhausting." He smiled, then sobered. "Do you think she would have liked me," he asked suddenly, "if she'd met me properly?" I thought of my mother, all her sharp edges and hidden soft ones. "Yes," I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. "I think she would have adored you and then found ways to annoy you every time she was scared." He laughed and something eased in his shoulders. When we finally stood up to leave, he hesitated. "Will we keep in touch?" he asked. "I mean, I know you have your life and I have mine. I don't want to force anything that isn't there." "I don't know what will be," I said, "but I'd like to at least know how you're doing from time to time." He nodded. "Me too." We exchanged numbers, real ones this time, not handed through agencies or shoved into shoeboxes. As we parted in the parking lot, he turned back. "She really kept the letters?" he asked again, as if saying it out loud cemented it into reality. "All of them," I said, like she was saving them for when she was brave enough. He nodded slowly. "Thank you," he said, "for calling, for giving me something else to believe." After he drove away, I sat in my car for a long time, hands on the steering wheel, tears running quietly down my cheeks. Not doing damage this time, just washing something old and brittle away. Sometimes at night, I still reach for the phone. Habit, I suppose. A part of me half expects to see unknown number glowing green on the tiny screen, to hear that familiar, impossible voice say, "Annie," with all its exasperated affection. She hasn't called again. I don't think she will. There are moments when I sit by the window with my tea and I talk to her anyway, out loud like a woman talking to herself. I tell her about the day I met Michael, about the way he laughed, about his nervous way of stirring sugar into his coffee even after he'd already sweetened it twice. I tell her about my grandchildren, about the way my oldest granddaughter reminds me of her, stubborn, fierce, prone to silent worries. I don't know if she hears me, I don't need to. What I know is this: the past doesn't disappear just because you bury it in an attic. It waits, it gathers weight, it grows teeth in the dark. Sometimes it calls you, 25 years after the person who made it is gone. I used to think ghosts were things that rattled chains and slammed doors. Now I think some ghosts are made of unanswered questions, of words unsaid, of truths boxed away. They haunt not with screams but with silence. My mother's calls, whatever they were, however they happened, pulled open a door I'd been content to leave closed. Behind it were pain, yes, and anger, and a brother who had been waiting far longer than I'd been hurting. Behind it was also a different version of my life, one where I was allowed to see my parents as human beings instead of statues, fallible, frightened, trying and failing and trying again. I sit by the window now and watch the seasons turn in my small backyard. The lilac bush blooms, then withers. The carrots come up, crooked and small but mine. The birds squabble at the feeder and then take flight. I am old, there are more years behind me than ahead, but for the first time in a long time, the weight in my chest feels lighter, not gone, just shifted. If I had to put a lesson to any of this, I suppose it would be simple. The dead don't always come back to frighten us. Sometimes they come back through memories, through letters, through the courage we finally find to hand us the truth we were too afraid to take when they were here. And the living, if they are lucky, get one more chance to answer the call.